You can elaborate on this as much as you would like, as much or as little as you would like, rather. But there is an argument with Margaret. Speaking of that rather suffered version of the Star-Spangled Banner, there is an argument between Edith and Margaret about donating proceeds to the Red Cross, and she is donating only a portion, and Edith suggests that she gives it all, and as an argument ensues, and within that argument, Edith begins talking about how servants in their home in Wytheville, if they were sent away, they were given money, see them on their way. There is an ongoing issue through the book of civil rights, of women's rights. It's very very pertinent to the time of day then, and very pertinent to what's happening now. I mean, it's pretty sad that it's over 100 years ago that this was happening, and we're dealing with the very same things in the same ways now.
Right, exactly. One of the reasons I wrote the book, know your history, because it repeats itself.
And it is definitely repeating itself. But can you talk a little bit about the servants in the Bolling home and their treatment of them, and how that correlated with that argument with Margaret Wilson?
Right, and it's true. They did have servants in their home, and of course, not their family particularly, but the grandparents and great grandparents did own slaves, and then of course, like many others, had to adapt again to a new world after the Civil War, and of course, that was very difficult for the Bolling family. They were a wealthy family, but and they, were never poor. I should not say that, because, of course, Edith's father was a judge. But what they had is many, many family members, and sometimes distant family members, coming to stay with them because they had lost everything, and they were having to go out and find new ways to support themselves. So not only were they supporting, 9 children and two grandmothers, but they had some servants that they also had to pay. But by all accounts, they treated them very fairly. There was the little girl, just a small little part in the story, who and it's partially fictionalized, of course, but Edith did have a very close friend who was a descendant of slaves who she befriended, and then this family had been sent away. Why isn't super clear, but it just kind of helps you see the emotion of the time, and how devastatingly awful it was for families and people just to be torn apart after the war. I mean, the recovery from the Civil War took generations.
Yes. And I don't know about one last question, one last thing I had written down. I want to mention before I get to that, I love your portrayal of Sally Bolling, and the way she puts her daughter in place. We won't go into it, but when she's reading the love letters between her and the president, there's a definite conclusion that she makes about the president's intentions. Well, but the scene where Edith is sweating and she's like, "Oh, you have forgotten what it's like to be a country girl. You need to come back home." And
That's right. Don't ever forget your roots. Yeah.
Yep.
And Sally's a great character. I think she was a great character in real life. And she's featured several times in the book because I know that she moved to Washington, D.C. and stayed, in the hotel there very close to them for many years. And she appears in many photographs. You see a historical photograph of Woodrow Wilson throwing out the first ball in a baseball game, and who's there but Sally? Mm-hmm. Over and over again.
Very prominent, very full of life, very much a genteel Wytheville lady. I liked her very much. May not have been from Wytheville originally, but she definitely was a Wytheville lady, and I love the way that she was portrayed. And something that you said about Mr. Bolling, he was a judge. He was very well respected. He was late to court the morning that Edith was born, and Edith Wilson said that her father said, "That was my start of keeping gentlemen waiting, which I've done for the rest of my life." But he was a judge and very well respected, but everybody came and spoke to him. He tipped their hat to them. That is 150 years ago, but people still do that in Wytheville today. People still speak to each other. It doesn't matter if you are the mayor of the town. Everybody knows everybody, and we all root for everybody for the most part.
I noticed that when I was there. A wonderful community feel.
And hope that you will find that again on your upcoming and hopefully more future visits to Wytheville. Have you been to the Edith Bolling Wilson Hotel?
I have been there. I went in the lobby and saw the glorious, glorious painting on the stairway there, and went to the thrift shop. At the time I visited, I actually didn't really know about it, so I hadn't planned to stay there. However, when I come back in just next month, I'm going to be staying there during my stay to come present at the museum. So I'm very, very excited about it to return.
Well, I have a story that I'd like to share with you about that hotel that means very, very much to me. It'll always be the George Wythe Hotel to me, which is what it was originally named in 1927, and I will tell you why. On Easter Sunday in 1944, my great-grandparents stayed in what is now room 409. It's on the top floor in the corner, which if you look out the window, it looks directly over the Edith Bolling Wilson home. They stayed on their wedding night in that room on room 409, and then 3 months later, he dies of leukemia. And 2 days after he dies, my great-grandmother finds out that she is pregnant with my grandmother. So none of us ever knew this man. He was very prominent. He owned a business. He could have been a major athlete, a professional athlete. He was very talented, very handsome. So he's like a fairy tale prince to us all. So fast forward 70 years. My great-grandmother is 92 years old. She meets her great-great-granddaughter 2 months before she passes away. And I tell her, I say, they're reopening the George Wythe Hotel. And I'm invited to the opening. You have to come with me. And I was so happy for her to be there. And she died 2 months before it opened.
Oh, goodness, almost so close.
So my wife and I got to stay there when it first opened. So, their love story started there. And I like to think mine and my wife's love story continued, with her great-great-granddaughter. So, and definitely that hotel being a big part of it. So that will always be a very, very special place to me. It's my goal one day to write a romance story about the George Wythe Hotel.
And you should. It is a grand place, and as I was saying in the beginning, one of the things I love about Wytheville is how they preserved the history, preserved the architecture, and the feel of the town. It's still there.
Absolutely. So I really appreciate you taking up so much time with me. I know I took up a little more than I had said, but we got in a good way of talking. But I want to end with my favorite part of the book. You tell a wonderful story, which you alluded to briefly a moment ago, about Edith as a young child playing with I think it was a daughter of a servant named Annie that was about her age, and something happens. And also, you talk about having a large family in her home, which she did, and she was educated at her grandmother's knee in exchange for Edith taking care of her grandmother and all the canaries and everybody in the house. Her grandmother's educated her in many things, and it was an informal education, but she got a great education. She learned all kinds of things from her grandmother, and
including French, which is important when she went to France after the war.
Yes, indeed, and you wouldn't get that in a normal education, and laid the foundation for what wound up being a very smart and self-sufficient woman. But anyway, I'd like to end with you recounting the story, if you will, of the interaction between and the incident between Annie and Edith.
Yeah, well, that was part fiction and part real life, based on a real little girl that was Edith's friend, who was a descendant of slaves, but Edith became very close to her. And then for some reason, historically, the family was forced to move on. I don't either don't recall or it wasn't in the history the reasons why. But this was an important relationship to Edith, and it really broke her heart when she had to leave. So I invented a scene that kind of led to this kerfluffle that made them leave. And in the scene, I have her falling out of a tree. When I was visiting Wytheville, I walked down the main street a little bit past St. John's Church, and there was this beautiful gazebo set back from the little road a little bit in this beautiful garden park, and it was just full of flowers, and it was just so beautiful. And there was a couple in there, and they kind of walked down, and then one of my grandsons went down and got in that walk into the gazebo, and just kind of playing around as a 7-year-old would do, and I took this photograph, and it just made me start thinking about a scene, and maybe this is where something happened between the two girls that then led, because I know that Edith felt some guilt about it, although I wasn't sure why. So it was being on the ground, which is really, really important to me when writing my books, because I write biographical historical fiction, that I go to the places as much as possible and see what it's like, and feel it and smell it, and learn something about the people. And so many of my scenes are based in just real places I got to visit, and it was that beautiful gazebo down the street from their home and from the church that inspired that scene.
And that's Elizabeth Brown Memorial Park that you're talking about, for all people in Wytheville wanting to know which one, because there's another one near the schoolhouse. It's called Withers Park, and it has a round oval walking track in it. And
I think we went to that one too, and there's the one with the big lion fountain a few blocks away. Oh, we took the kids to all the parks. It was just a wonderful day.
Yeah, and there are lots of great things in. There are lots of great parks and places to walk. I being in a wheelchair and having a 10-year-old daughter, there are not a lot of neighborhoods you can safely walk/roll in. And we're very fortunate that we can take walks as a family every day in Wytheville. And we visit Elizabeth Brown during the summertime on almost a daily basis. That is also home to our summer festival, the Chautauqua Festival, which is a week-long music festival that we have for free for all people in the community. And we've done that since the year I was born, the year before I was born. So that's great history you're talking about. But the story with Annie was my favorite story. I was dying to know how much of that was fictional and how much of that was real. But you really, that was one of the most beautiful scenes in the book.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading it and for taking it into your heart.
And another that I really enjoyed was because of the fall with Annie, where she hurt herself. She was squeamish at the sight of blood, not because of what it did to her, but because it sent her friend Annie away, and she's touring the rehabilitation center.
In Tours, France, you mean, after the war?
Yes, and was sent back to that memory of Annie, which I thought you conveyed that beautifully. That was my favorite scene in the entire book.
Yeah, it was also my little way of having sort of a handshake and a passing of baton between the characters of my book. And in that scene, she meets Julia Stimson, because historically, Julia Stimson, who was the protagonist in my novel Just Before the President's Wife, The War Nurse, and she was historically also the director of nursing over all of Europe, and was in Tours, France, in that hospital at the time. Now, it's not documented historically that they met, but it's documented. I know that that's where Julia was the chief of nursing, and I know that President and Mrs. Wilson went and visited it. So it seems natural, of course, they would have met, but that gave me the opportunity to have a little bit of the baton to carry forward. And of course, I know Julia was very much in favor of suffrage, and Edith, as we know, originally at first was against it, pretty much going back to her roots and how she grew up, and women's roles and protecting women and women's roles were her reasoning. But anyway, I like to have just a little baton passing through mine, and I was very excited to be able to do that because historically they would have met. And then Edith actually gets to meet my next protagonist, Catherine Wright Haskell, who that's the book I'm on tour with right now. But Edith does get to meet Catherine Wright because historically Catherine did meet pretty much all the presidents, and at that time, 1920, Edith was pretty much the acting president. So that's why I wrote Edith in the scene in Catherine the Wright sister as well.
Oh, very good. So Edith continues on in the next book.
She does. She appears. She's got a cameo.
And congratulations on all your success. Wishing you much continued success in the future. Thank you for visiting Wytheville, making Wytheville a part of your book tour. It is a favorite of Wytheville for sure, and it will be my pleasure to get to meet you next month.
I'm looking forward to it, and thank you, Zach, so much for taking your time and reading my book, and I can't wait to come to Wytheville and chat some more about it.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. I would love to have another chance to stay there, because I will tell you that with my personal history with the hotel, as the George Wythe Hotel, my wife has also sang there and entertained there as well.
Oh, wow.
So, there's lots of great stuff there. Just because I tell you, when you stay there, And I'm not talking about paranormal or anything like that, but when you stay there, and as a fellow writer, you're gonna know what I mean. You can feel the history in that place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't mean
I
that
know
in
what you mean.
I don't mean that in an otherworldly sense, but you can feel the history, you can feel the people, you can, I definitely, we all wanted to connect to my great grandfather, and none of us ever got to. And I think that is as close to him as I think I'll ever get. So being in that hotel is like, Grandpa Ralph, are you up there? I'm here, And
Well, let's plan to meet there.
yeah, oh, I would love it. I would love it. Well, it's been an honor to speak with you. Thank you for taking so much time with me. You've been very generous. And as I said, I enjoyed your book, and I look forward to meeting you again soon.
We will. All right. Thank you again so
Thank,
much.
thank you.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.